Hey guys, today I'll show you a horror TV series named The Hot Zone Season 1. Spoilers ahead, watch out and take care. The drama begins in 1980 Congo, Africa, where the French owner of a luxurious mansion suddenly fell ill. He was sweating profusely and the servants called for a car. Despite his weak condition, he mustered the strength to board a plane to his destination. By this time, his body was covered in pus-filled sores and he was extremely weak. As the plane jolted, his vomit nearly burst the entire vomit bag. The foul-smelling odor filled the cabin, and the flight attendant carefully approached like she was handling a bomb. She emptied the blood and fluid from the vomit bag into the airplane toilet. Upon landing, the Frenchman was rushed to the hospital for emergency treatment. The doctor in charge was unsure of the illness, but upon learning that the man had visited a cave in Congo, he suspected it might be the cause. The man had already lost a lot of blood, his skin was sagging and covered in sores, and he desperately needed a breathing tube. However, the doctor discovered something blocking the tube. As he reached into the man's throat to check, the patient suddenly vomited bloody fluid all over the doctor. This incident infected the doctor with the Marburg virus. His blood sample was sent to the U.S. Army Medical Research Institute of Infectious Diseases to be stored with other virus samples belonging to the same biohazard level 4. The scene then fast-forwards to the present timeline in 1989, when a U.S. Army veterinarian, Nancy, and her family were celebrating Thanksgiving. While cutting the turkey, she accidentally sliced her hand, but thankfully it wasn't serious. Her husband, Jerry, tenderly applied a bandage to her wound. As the family enjoyed their Thanksgiving evening, a package with a biohazard tag was left at the entrance of the research institute. Nancy was a researcher at the institute. The package, which came from the Hazelton Research Institute, contained a sample from monkey number 53. Upon opening the package, they found a huge blood clot from the monkey's spleen wrapped in tin foil. Nancy suspected that the monkey was infected with the simian hemorrhagic fever virus, which is infectious and can tear apart a monkey's internal organs but doesn't harm humans. Nancy cultured the tissue, but the view under the microscope was quite different from her suspicion. Simian hemorrhagic fever wouldn't attack cells like this, so she suspected an unknown deadly pathogen. However, the Institute's virus expert, Peter, disagreed, thinking the sample might have been contaminated by bacteria, and there was no need to worry. Still concerned, Nancy feared that the sample contained a lethal filovirus and decided to conduct further tests in a laboratory of higher biosafety. Anxiously, she contacted her mentor, Professor Carter, who refused to get involved and didn't answer her calls. All pathogens contained in Level 4 are deadly and incurable, with the most frightening being filoviruses. These viruses can be transmitted through blood, mucus, excretion, vomit, and even sweat. 9 years before, the said doctor in Congo had contracted the Marburg virus from a patient's vomit, showing that these viruses are extremely dangerous. Nancy found a soldier named Capt, who had an undergraduate degree in pathology, to accompany her to the biohazard level 4 area to test the sample. Meanwhile, Peter contacted the monkey house in Reston, where monkeys were kept and later sold for lab testing. The house director told him that monkey 53 was likely infected with simian hemorrhagic fever, so Peter advised him to isolate the monkey from the others. The director then informed the monkey caretaker and other staff, who were unaware of the situation at the research institute. Peter was cultivating bacteria, believing that the sample had merely been contaminated with a common soil bacterium, and thought Nancy was overly suspicious. At the same time, Nancy and Soldier Capt stripped off all their clothing and jewelry and put on sterilized protective suits. They moved from the Level 0 area into the Level 2 area, where negative air pressure ensured that hazardous materials wouldn't escape. Ultraviolet light could break down viruses, shattering their genetic material and preventing regeneration. They then entered the Level 3 area, sealing all gaps with tape and putting on a second layer of protective clothing. The Level 4 area, known as the Hot Zone, was designed without sharp edges, but tools like scalpels would still be used. Therefore, they had to work in pairs, checking each other's clothing for tears and prohibiting anyone from entering alone. Lastly, the protective suits could induce claustrophobia and were not very beginner-friendly. Once connected to the air supply, they could breathe normally, but had to slow their breathing rate. The door led to the Level 4 area's airlock chamber, with overhead nozzles for disinfection upon exiting. It was Capt's first time doing this, and he was nervous. With this mindset, he followed Nancy into the high-risk Level 4 area. After a series of procedures, she told CAPT that she would be performing a fluorescent immunoassay. The cells she had previously seen in the culture medium were not only dead, but had burst open. The sample was likely a filovirus. Nancy carefully opened the freezer in front of her, which stored all known filoviruses on Earth. If these were released, every person on the planet would be doomed. She prepared to test various anti-serum samples, first taking out the said doctor's viral antibody serum to test if it was the Marburg virus. If correct, the serum would emit a green light. However, the serum under the microscope didn't glow, indicating it wasn't the Marburg virus. But this was not good news. Meanwhile, in the lab, the foolish Peter was mixing the cultured bacteria with the incoming sample and having his assistant Ben smell it. After sniffing, they realized it wasn't the common Pseudomonad bacteria. This meant trouble. If it wasn't Marburg, could it be the Ebola virus, which had similar symptoms but a fatality rate that rose from 30% to 90%? Just as they were about to continue testing, CAPT suddenly noticed a tear in Nancy's sleeve. This was a big deal, so Nancy quickly abandoned her work, rushed back to the airlock chamber for disinfection, and removed her protective suit and gloves. She noticed a tear on her hand, but luckily it was from cutting the turkey earlier. Entering the level 4 area with a wound made her superior unhappy. Nancy explained the urgency, suspecting it might be the Ebola virus. However, Peter still believed it was the simian hemorrhagic fever virus based on his own experience. All the samples had been damaged during the sterilization process and could no longer be used. The general also thought the likelihood of Ebola was low. If it were Ebola, there would already be a pile of bodies. Nancy claimed Ebola might have mutated, but the general still didn't believe her smelly bullshit and forbade her from re-entering the level 4 area. After Peter stepped out, he saw the bacteria detected in the report, which showed that the sample wasn't contaminated. This made him increasingly uneasy. Nancy's husband, Jerry, scolded her for disregarding her and her family's safety to do such dangerous work. She told him it was her duty and responsibility. She needed to find another monkey for sampling, and Jerry agreed. Nancy drove to the monkey house and found the caretaker, asking him for some fresh samples for testing. The caretaker, understanding the severity of the situation, agreed to help her without going through the proper channels. However, he didn't know that Nancy only wanted fresh muscle tissue. The clueless caretaker brought 4 monkeys that had died from infection the day before, with only 2 layers of bags. After some consideration, Nancy asked him to help load the monkeys into her car. She needed to get them to the lab before they thawed. She requested that the caretaker follow her in his car in case the virus-contaminated blood spilled onto the highway. At this time, Nancy's mentor, Professor Carter, received another message and fax from her. She had determined that it was a filovirus and that an outbreak could sweep through Washington, D.C. She urgently needed her teacher's help. The time flashes back to 1976 in Zaire, Africa. Carter and his research partner, Dr. Rhodes, received a report from a local medical man stating that a plague had broken out in the Zaire jungle, causing many casualties. People there were losing their humanity, so Carter and Rhodes went to investigate, collected new samples, and took them back. They arrived at a village and inquired about the hospital and the situation. The villagers said that the forest was bleeding. The story then returns to the present time, with a restless Peter waking up early at 5 a.m. and rushing to the research institute. The remaining bacteria reports came out, showing no contamination. The data stated that when the Ebola virus enters the human body, it first targets the liver's immune system and endothelial cells, infiltrating the living cells by merging with the outer membrane, like the Trojan horse. Once the virus penetrates the cell's protective barrier, it hijacks the cellular system to meet its needs. Early symptoms of infection include headache, fever, and nausea. On the other side, Nancy rushed to the research institute with 4 dead monkey samples but got caught in peak traffic. Along the way, the caretaker following her honked his horn incessantly. Nancy was forced to stop on the highway. It turned out the dead monkeys had thawed, and the virus-contaminated blood had seeped out. She deliberately caused the caretaker's car to break down and then went to buy bleach. They quickly repackaged the monkey corpses and bleached the blood before the traffic police arrived. The caretaker pretended to have fixed his car, and Nancy took the opportunity to leave. When she arrived at the lab door, she found her access card had been disabled. Peter appeared, knowing that his previous judgment was wrong and that the sample had not been contaminated by other bacteria. He used his card to open the door for Nancy, and they tested the fresh monkey samples she had just brought. After some operations, the sample under the microscope emitted a green light, confirming it was undoubtedly the Ebola virus. The two urgently contacted their superiors and sent the test report to Carter. Nancy and the colonel went to find the head of the monkey house. At first, the colonel didn't take it seriously until Nancy told him that Ebola could easily spread through various means. The survival rate of those infected with the virus was only 10%. The head finally realized the severity of the problem. The workers at the monkey house might have already been infected and could have spread the virus to their families. They would later experience headache, heavy bleeding, sudden heart failure, and would likely die from bleeding within 8 days. And to be worse, there was no cure for the virus. At this time, there was only one monkey left in the source of the infection, Room H. It had stopped eating. The unsuspecting caretaker was handling its feces and feeding it. Peter worried that his assistant Ben, who had smelled the sample, had been infected, but today was the weekend, and he didn't answer the phone. Peter went to an AIDS testing clinic and persuaded a nurse to teach him how to draw blood, planning to test secretly whether he had been infected with the Ebola virus. At this time, Ben was on vacation with his family in the deep mountains and forests. Fortunately, when he wanted to get intimate with his wife, the children interrupted their smelly moment. However, he and his wife had already had skin contact. Nancy planned to euthanize the last infected monkey in Room H and thoroughly disinfect the room. Her husband, Jerry, wanted to undertake this dangerous task for her, but she didn't agree. At this point, she needed the help of her experienced mentor, Carter. But it seemed that Carter had done something wrong 13 years ago and was ostracized by everyone in the industry. The story goes back to 1976, when Carter and Rhodes arrived at the hospital where the local medical man worked. Women were cleaning the bodies of the deceased. Young Sister Monica was giving injections to the local patients. Upon inquiry, Sister Monica said that the medical man was not here. He was in a deeper village in the jungle. She hadn't heard from him for several weeks. She then drew a map for the two to show the location of the village where the medical man was. Back to 1989, the present timeline, Carter finally arrived at Nancy's summons. He asked if anyone had been infected, and Nancy said no one had shown any symptoms yet. Carter asked if all the staff had been quarantined, and Nancy said they had no authority to quarantine employees. That meant there was a potential risk of exposure around Washington, D.C., but the priority was to deal with the infected monkey. Ben finally returned to work at the research institute. Peter informed him that the virus sample was Ebola. Hearing that, Ben was furious because Peter had let him smell Ebola and he had intimate contact with his wife. Peter quickly reassured him, saying that the virus was not airborne and the chances of them being infected were slim. They couldn't infect others so quickly after exposure. As long as they tested their blood here every day and persisted for 21 days, they would be past the window period. Ben wanted to report the incident, but selfish Peter stopped him, believing that Ben's children couldn't endure being quarantined in a narrow room for 21 days. After hearing this, Ben gave up. At the monkey house, Bruce, the employee wearing an orange uniform, had started experiencing headaches but didn't take it seriously. The monkey house director asked the caretaker for the key to Room H, hesitated to grab a donut touched by other employees, and eventually withdrew his hand. The director then gave the key to Nancy, asking her and Carter to carry out a secret mission to avoid causing panic among the employees. While putting on protective gear in the boiler room, Carter told Nancy that the monkeys were quite aggressive. She needed to be careful. Once they were fully dressed at the entrance of Room H, they opened the door and went in. They found the sickly-looking monkey and carefully opened the iron door. Carter used an iron rod to hold the monkey's body, while Nancy's goggles were hit by a precise spit from the sick monkey. Despite that, she quickly jabbed a syringe of tranquilizer into the monkey's chest and injected it, causing the monkey to stop moving. Meanwhile, Ben realized he might have been infected, avoided his children's hugs, and didn't even dare to use soap when bathing. His wife noticed something was off, and after pressing him, Ben finally told her the truth. His wife was terrified and urged him to return to the lab and report to his superiors. Having completed the mission to euthanize the monkey, Nancy said goodbye to Carter and went home. However, Carter was still worried. Back at the monkey house, he saw another group of monkeys in Room G, adjacent to Room H, and noticed a sick monkey inside. Perhaps the virus had already spread. The time flashes back to 1976, as Carter and Rhodes went deeper into the jungle to find the said local medical man. Along the way, they were stopped by a group of local soldiers. After explaining their identities, the soldiers let them into the village, which looked like hell on earth. Burnt houses and corpses were everywhere, as the locals tried to prevent the spread of the virus. The medical man there had not been spared. A sick villager approached them but was shot dead by a soldier who quickly burned the body. Carter's chance to collect a sample was ruined, and they had to look elsewhere for fresh virus samples. So he decided to return to the hospital to inform the nuns of the medical man's death and continue searching for clues. Rhodes was unwilling, but he had no choice but to follow. When they returned to the village, the bustling atmosphere was gone, replaced by wary villagers and closed doors. Local soldiers guarded the entrance to the hospital, isolating it completely. Melinda, from the International Relief Association, arrived to deliver supplies to the hospital but was turned away. It was clear that a severe epidemic had broken out in the hospital. Melinda said she had heard screams from the hospital the day before, but today there was no sound. Carter and Rhodes negotiated with the soldiers, telling them they were sent by the general. The soldiers changed their attitude and agreed to let them pass. However, anyone other than Carter and Rhodes would be shot if they tried to leave. They saw an old nun, looking sickly and slumped at the entrance, unresponsive to their questions. She eventually gestured with her eyes that Sister Monica was inside and then too weak to warn them not to go in. They suddenly caught a glimpse of 5 blood-stained corpses in the courtyard. They entered the hospital, and the bloody footprints on the floor and blood-stained towels in the frames made their hearts race. Following the footprints, they slowly pushed open a door to find Sister Monica lifeless in a wicker chair, unresponsive to their questions. Suddenly, she woke up, coughed violently, fell forward, and spat blood before passing away. Back to the present timeline, Nancy and her mentor urgently meet with the general to inform him about the infected monkeys discovered in Room G. They urge the general to quickly send troops to euthanize all infected monkeys and disinfect the monkey house. The general realizes the serious situation but looks troubled. Peter scolds Ben for telling his wife about his possible infection, but Ben told him he had assured his wife that she wouldn't spread the news. At home, his wife repeatedly scrubs the bathtub to ensure the safety of the entire family. She feels incredibly overwhelmed. Back at the monkey house, Bruce begins to experience weakness and vomiting. The others, frightened, isolate him for rest. Upon learning that Bruce might have been infected with the Ebolavirus by the monkeys, the caretaker realizes that he himself might also be infected. Extremely anxious, he and the director decide to buy a thermometer to check Bruce's temperature. At the supermarket, he behaves like a thief, afraid to touch anyone or anything that others have touched, including the thermometer. He avoids any possibility of infecting others. Eventually, they take Bruce, who has a confirmed fever, to the research institute. Nancy and others want to take Bruce into the lab for blood tests, but the head of the disease control center, Rhodes, suddenly arrives. Ignoring her advice, he forcibly takes Bruce to a hospital without proper isolation facilities. Rhodes believes that Bruce has not been infected with the Ebola virus and tells Nancy not to make the whole city plunge into panic. She watches helplessly as he takes a dangerous patient to the hospital. The time flashes back to 1976, when Carter learns from the old nun that it's their headmaster who had brought the plague into the hospital. Due to a shortage of supplies, the nuns used one needle to inject many people, only changing it every 2 days, which helped boost the spreading of the virus. Carter and Rhodes take samples from Sister Monica's body. The infected old nun, feeling extremely guilty, approaches the door and is shot dead by a soldier. She wants to atone for her sins in this way. Back to the present, the hospital takes blood from Bruce and sends the blood sample to the research institute. At this point, Peter and Ben have isolated themselves, fearing they might infect others. Peter doesn't dare to see his fiancée, who thinks he is cheating on her. They don't have time for explanations, so the two head to the Level 4 lab to test Bruce's blood pressure. At the same time, the leaders of the Ministry of Defense hold an emergency meeting. Nancy states that the Ebola virus can spread to a large city of 6 million people in just 20 minutes, using the body's own cellular mechanisms to replicate itself. The newly formed viruses expand until they are transported throughout the body, with a fatality rate of up to 90%. The virus can remain latent inside the body, so all the monkeys in the house must be euthanized. However, the CDC Director Rhodes opposes it once again, arguing that the tested samples may only have a fluorescent reaction to the Ebola test and may not be the actual virus. It's too risky to cause public panic without even one confirmed human case, especially since Bruce's blood sample has not yet tested positive for the virus. Nancy explains that there is a latent window period for the virus. To emphasize the importance, Carter claims that the virus is airborne. Nancy continues, saying that a few years ago, a study confirmed that monkeys were infected with the virus with zero contact. Imagine an infected person entering a public place, and one sneeze could spread 1 million active viruses. Everyone present shudders at the thought. But euthanizing so many monkeys is a big deal. Until they receive permission, everyone can only wait patiently. In the flashback, after reviewing medical records, Carter discovers that there was a pregnant woman who had an injection at the hospital and then returned to her village. It is likely that she was also infected. Carter decides to pack up and find the pregnant woman to learn more about the specific symptoms, transmission routes, and incubation period of the Ebola virus. However, Rhodes is clearly afraid, worried that he might also be infected. At that moment, he just wants to escape and submit the blood samples. Despite this, Carter insists on going to the village to cut off the source of infection. Back to the present timeline, the director of the monkey house still hasn't received permission to euthanize the monkeys, and he is anxious. Nancy suggests that he could try applying pressure from the outside. The director takes the hint, revealing the Ebola-infected monkeys situation to a Washington Post reporter. After researching, the reporter learns that Ebola has a tremendous ability to destroy and spread. Its mutation and evolution capabilities are faster than anything else on Earth. This frightens her. Nancy knows that obtaining approval won't be far off. At this point, the authorities order the monkey house to be closed that night. The caretaker turns off the radio, switches off all the lights, and leaves. In the flashback, Carter and his team rent a helicopter to head to the village where the infected pregnant woman lives. He and the pilot agree to pick them up in 3 days. As soon as they land, a group of locals surrounds them cautiously. To alleviate their apprehension, the 3 visitors don't wear masks and approach the villagers, greeting them in the local way and explaining their purpose. The tribal chief then brings the 3 into the village. There are many pregnant women here, but they don't know which one is the carrier of the virus. Hospitable villagers pour them a glass of water to share. After one villager takes a sip, he passes the bowl to Rhodes. Rhodes is afraid to drink, but it's the local custom, and to gain their trust, he must drink. Reluctantly, Rhodes takes a sip. Back to the present, they receive approval finally. Nancy and Carter find some soldiers with relevant backgrounds for interviews. They ask about the soldiers and their family members' situations to determine if they are suitable for this dangerous task. At this moment, Nancy receives news that her father is critically ill in the hospital. She wants to see her father, but this mission is urgent and many lives are in her hands. She hesitates. Her father tells her it's okay, and she must stay there because they need her. Nancy tearfully tells her father to hold on and hangs up the phone. At this time, Ben calls her to the lab and tells her about how he and Peter had smelled the virus samples. He knows he reported late, but so far he and Peter are both negative. However, Peter is now missing, and it would be dangerous if Peter is exposed to the crowd. Nancy tells Ben to stay in the lab while she drives to the train station that Peter passes through every day on his way to work. She finds him there. Just as she's about to scold him, Peter shows her the gloves he's wearing, showing he's avoiding spreading any potential virus in the public. But Peter regrets not following procedures and sniffing the samples based on his experience. He doesn't know what to do now. Peter convinces Nancy to allow him and Ben to stay in the lab, and this way they can help her test samples. Over 500 monkeys are set to be euthanized this time. The commanding officer is worried about Nancy encountering any accidents, so he brings in her husband Jerry to suggest that he takes her place in executing the mission. Nancy assigns a soldier to guard the entrance of the monkey house to prevent outsiders from entering the closed facility. Bruce is still in the hospital, and another blood sample is sent to the Research Institute for examination. Although he tested negative the day before and showed no significant discomfort, the virus's incubation period could last for several weeks, so they can't afford to be careless. In the flashback, after sharing a drink with the villagers, Carter and his team are taken to the doorstep of the infected pregnant woman's home, but the villagers don't let them in. They believe that the family, not only infected with the virus, is also cursed. At this moment, a nearby school teacher emerges from their home and convinces the tribal chief to let the 3 visitors in. The trio puts on masks and enters the dimly lit hut, where the smell inside is unbearable and the pregnant woman's body is covered in pus-filled sores. The scene shifts back to the present time. Nancy is training newly summoned soldiers, explaining to them that the Ebola virus is classified as a biohazard level 4 pathogen because there's currently no vaccine for it. The specific transmission route is unknown, but it can definitely be transmitted through bodily fluids. If their protective suits are torn, they'll be quarantined in a small isolation room for 3 weeks. The hungry monkeys who haven't eaten since the previous day are now more aggressive, so they must be cautious. This mission is voluntary, and anyone with the slightest hesitation can opt out now, but everyone is resolute. Nancy is then called out by her husband, who informs her that he's going to carry out the mission in her place. She argues with him, but his mind is made up. To protect his wife, he's willing to risk his own life. Ultimately, it's decided that Jerry and Carter will lead the team on the mission. Carter feels that the terrifying virus is continuously evolving. Super Ebola will undoubtedly appear, and it differs from ordinary bacteria. After infection, no symptoms will appear, and carriers may unknowingly spread the virus. If they don't take precautions in advance, the consequences are unimaginable. Peter and Ben are testing the blood samples sent by Nancy in the Level 4 lab. They observe a fluorescent reaction in Bruce's blood sample, indicating he's infected with the Ebolavirus. When Nancy visits her daughter's school, she receives an urgent call from Peter. The worst-case scenario has occurred. In the flashback, after taking blood samples from the infected woman, Rhodes once again requests to return. He's afraid of being infected himself. At this moment, they hear a commotion outside, where the villagers have surrounded the teacher, accusing Carter and his team of also bearing the disease and blaming the teacher. The villagers' fearful eyes are unforgettable to Rhodes until now, who worries that the same situation might happen among millions of people in the city. He wants his wife, Melinda, to support his decision not to isolate Bruce, since he hasn't shown the terrifying symptoms they saw in Africa 13 years ago. However, Melinda senses that Rhodes harbors resentment towards Carter. At this time, Carter is training the team on how to use protective suits and change batteries for their respirators. He tells them not to panic if their batteries run out, and to learn to adjust their breathing to ensure their companions stay by their side. Carter suddenly turns off the lights, allowing the soldiers to experience what it's like in a power outage. During the mission, they're to check their protective suits every 10 minutes and rest every 45 minutes. At this moment, a soldier experiences severe claustrophobia. Carter turns the lights back on and decides this soldier isn't suited for the mission, so they'll need to find a replacement. Nancy arrives at the hospital and informs Rhodes that Bruce has been infected. Other employees who have returned home may also be infected, posing a risk to their families. Urgent blood tests are needed for all relevant personnel. However, Rhodes remains skeptical about the results, as Bruce's health condition remains stable. If the news were to be leaked to the media, it would inevitably cause panic. The city could face the same riots as the village 13 years ago due to fear. Nancy tells him there's no need to publicize the matter and blood tests can be conducted discreetly. The two arrive at the church, where another employee from the monkey house is sharing a cup with others, taking turns drinking holy water. Subsequently, all the employees and those who have been in contact with them are taken to the hospital for blood sampling. After handling the matter, Nancy rushes to the hospital where her critically ill father is staying to visit him. Her kind father says he has always tried to protect her, not because he believes she can't protect herself. He's very proud of her and tells her not to worry about him and to focus on saving the world. With tears in her eyes, she kisses her father's forehead. By now, it's late at night. After everything is set, the team members board a vehicle heading to the monkey house, ready to fight this unseen enemy. To avoid causing public panic, the monkey extermination team secretly heads to the monkey house to eliminate the source of the virus. The soldier who is guarding the entrance is startled by the sound of an engine. It turns out to be the reporter trying to verify the authenticity of the epidemic. The soldier hurriedly calls Nancy to inform her. Jerry receives the news and wants to abort the mission, but Carter insists they can't delay any longer. At this moment, the reporter approaches the soldier, inquiring about the situation. He stammers, saying he's on the phone with his girlfriend, and the reporter hesitantly believes him. She leaves her phone number and returns to her car to leave. The mission can continue. The scene shifts back to Zaire in 1976. Carter tells Rhodes that for thousands of years, the virus has lived within pigs, bats, and monkeys. However, when humans destroy animal habitats, the virus needs to find a new host. Their only weakness might be that they kill people too quickly, exposing themselves. If they could evolve to lie dormant within the human body for extended periods before attacking, like AIDS, it would be even more terrifying. Back to the present, Nancy anxiously watches at the hospital as the monkey house employees and their families have their blood drawn. She wants to conduct more extensive blood tests, but the nurse says no one has shown any symptoms yet. By the time the team arrives at the monkey house, daylight is broken and children are playing nearby. Jerry leaves the soldier to continue guarding the entrance. Nancy brings the blood samples from the hospital to the lab. She sees Peter and Ben, who are worried about being infected. She insists that they must test their blood daily. She then re-enters the Level 4 lab with Peter, and they get to work. On the other side, the team is making their final preparations. They are forbidden from wearing protective gear outside to avoid drawing attention. They must anesthetize each of the 500 monkeys, collect blood samples, and then send them to the euthanasia area. If blood gets on their protective gear, they must stop working and clean it with bleach. This virus is different from AIDS, as it remains active for several days after being exposed to air. After putting on their protective gear, they enter the monkey house one by one. They then establish a gray zone, a buffer zone, and a purification zone. Carter instructs them to purify themselves after leaving the high-risk area and properly incinerate their protective gear before covering the area with plastic sheeting. The area is dim and the lights flicker. At this point, the fuse burns out, leaving only emergency lighting. They navigate the narrow and cramped passageways to the room where the monkeys are kept. The monkeys are on high alert, with some already dead. They then become agitated, and some throw excrement at the team members. Carter orders them to go out and wash it off with bleach, not touching anything else. Meanwhile, Nancy and Peter are testing blood samples and discover 2 new cases of virus infection. She urgently contacts Rhodes, and the hospital patients being tested look at him nervously. In the flashback, 2 more locals were infected. Carter and his team, like other infected families, were avoided by people. The pregnant woman is about to give birth, and Rhodes wants Carter to help. Carter, with a face of despair, tells him that it's exactly what the virus wants you to do. Expose yourself to it. The woman and her child can't be saved, but Rhodes displays exceptional bravery, puts on a mask with Melinda, and goes in to deliver the baby for the pregnant woman. Returning to the present, Rhodes calls over the 2 confirmed infected employees of the monkey house. The female employee, before leaving, has already left a message for her son. In the monkey house, Jerry orders everyone to take a 15-minute break every 45 minutes. They must work in pairs, and solo actions are prohibited. One person opens the cage while the other uses a pole to hold the monkey in place and then anesthetizes it. Blood samples are collected while the monkey's heart is still beating. Then they inject a euthanasia drug and send the monkey to Carter for dissection and tissue sample collection. The samples are sealed in triple-layer bags and sent to the incinerator. Each time blood flows into the drain, a bucket of bleach is poured in. The team members begin their work under their guidance. Soon after, Nancy receives the first batch of monkey blood samples. She realizes that this Ebola virus is very different from previous ones. All samples have a fluorescent reaction, but why do the monkey organs suffer severe damage while the infected humans only have fever and headache symptoms at most? There's no vomiting or bleeding. It seems like the virus could evolve to have an extended incubation period, trying to infect more people before symptoms appear. Nancy sees that Peter is exhausted and tells him to go rest. In the airlock chamber, Peter disinfects himself but collapses there. At the monkey house, 2 soldiers open the cage and control a monkey, but suddenly another one jumps out. As they search for it, Capt walks in. The monkey takes the opportunity to pounce on Capt and escapes through the door. When they react, Capt's hand has already been scratched by the monkey. The lab's alarm goes off, and Capt is sent to the isolation room. Peter is just exhausted and not in serious danger. The soldier outside the door receives news of the monkey's escape. He hurriedly puts on protective gear and goes to the roof to seal the ventilation ducts. A few people chase the monkey through the corridors. The monkey runs fast and climbs up an open ventilation duct. Capt seals the duct before it escapes. The monkey has no choice but to return, where it's caught by Jerry and Carter, who administers an anesthetic. But at this moment, 2 people wearing protective gear on the roof are seen by a resident. Capt is urgently sent to the isolation room, where he knows he'll be locked up for another 21 days. He is very agitated. Capt says their eyes look just like humans. Nancy comforts him and tells him she'll come again tomorrow. After talking to Jerry on the phone, she hears that he has reached his limit and warns her superiors to send support. At this time, Ben also has a fever. Although both their blood samples are currently negative, this virus is very special, and symptoms may appear later. This has pushed their mental states to the brink of collapse. Peter apologizes to Ben for letting him smell the sample, but Ben doesn't blame him. Carter discovers a liquid sample from one of the monkeys that is unlike the others, which seems odd. He heads to the office to verify the situation. Meanwhile, Jerry has been working for 12 hours straight without a break. At his teammates' urging, he orders them to eat something. When the team members arrive at the dining hall, they find that people around them are eyeing them warily. Carter goes to the data room and realizes that they were supposed to receive 94 monkeys, but for some reason they received one less. As Jerry is about to eat, he suddenly collapses. Nanks arrives at the scene and hears this news. The unconscious Jerry is put into a vehicle. Nancy chats with her weak husband and then asks the driver to take him to the hospital. She puts on a protective suit and enters the monkey house to find Carter. She discovers that a team member is dissecting a monkey corpse alone. Halfway through, his protective suit starts to deflate as the battery runs out, making it difficult for him to breathe. He forgot to bring a spare battery, and Nancy's spare battery is a different model. She comforts him while calling for someone to bring a battery via radio. Two team members hear her and go to bring the battery to the dissection area for support. By this time, he is panicking and can't listen to anything Nancy says, insisting on leaving. Thankfully, the battery arrives in time and he can breathe again. At this moment, reporters show up again. Meanwhile, Nancy's father in the hospital is not doing well, but doesn't want his wife to call their daughter. Back at Carter's side, he is in the freezer, counting the number of dead monkeys. Carter tells Nancy that the cargo manifest from the Philippines clearly states that 94 animals were unloaded at the airport, but they only received 93. One monkey is missing, possibly spreading the mutated virus outside. Nancy asks Carter to quickly track down the missing monkey. However, Carter needs the appropriate authorization, and he can only seek help from Rhodes, who he despises due to their past stories. In the flashback, the tribal chief realizes he can no longer hear the monkey's sounds and understands that it's not a curse. Carter asks the chief to help isolate infected people. However, the chief says that it goes against human nature. He decides to use the old methods passed down through generations. Although many people will die, some will survive. Carter is inspired and decides to postpone his return home, waiting for someone to recover from the virus infection. The plasma of survivors will contain antibodies, which is the only chance to find a cure. But Rhodes says that Carter will endanger everyone. Back to the present, the director arrives at the monkey house and tricks the reporters into leaving with a lie. There are still 300 monkeys left to be dealt with. Nancy encourages everyone to complete the task and return home tomorrow. Two soldiers go to the door to relieve themselves and accidentally discover many used syringes for the monkeys scattered around. They rush back to report. At this moment, a boy playing nearby picks up a syringe. Nancy tells him not to touch it. The boy thinks they want to hurt him, so Nancy takes off her mask and slowly gains his trust. The boy throws away the syringe and Nancy carries him out. At this moment, Rhodes is desperately trying to convince his superiors to delay sounding the virus alarm. The current virus is likely a new strain. The officer becomes agitated because there is no known cure for the virus, and the CDC hasn't isolated the infected individuals. Rhodes explains that the symptoms so far are only mild fever and vomiting. Activating the disaster response team now would result in chaos, with people fleeing the city and widespread looting and disorder. He suggests waiting another day. The officer agrees. As they leave, Carter finds Rhodes and tells him that one monkey is missing. They rush to the airport and learn from the person in charge that the missing monkey had become sick and died, and its body had been disposed of. However, another batch of infected monkeys has been sent to a research facility in Texas. This is extremely dangerous, and they must intercept them as soon as possible. Back at the monkey house, a monkey that had just had blood drawn hadn't been completely anesthetized. It was still moving, pretending to be unconscious. The soldier is preparing to give it a euthanasia injection when the monkey suddenly pounces on her head, flapping back and forth on her helmet. Nancy hears the screams and rushes over, quickly putting an end to the monkey with a needle. The soldier gasps for breath. Thankfully, after inspection, her protective suit was not damaged. They finally deal with all the symptomatic monkeys and thoroughly disinfect the entire area. Nancy says the whole world should know that they've risked their lives for the safety of others. But people may never know everything they've done. They salute each other and prepare to go home. Nancy then receives the news of her father's death from the commanding officer. Her husband is only suffering from dehydration and will be fine. She clings to Jerry like a child. Meanwhile, Carter manages to find the sick monkey in time, before it would have been shipped to another location across the country. It was a close call, and Rhodes admits Carter was right. Everyone else had overlooked the situation. The story goes back to 1976 for the last time. The tribal chief has also become infected with the Ebolavirus. Carter tells him that he has found a young girl who has survived the infection. Her fever has subsided, and her blood may contain the antibodies needed for a cure. The chief's illness has become public knowledge, and he knows that people will soon come from other villages to mourn his passing. They will touch his body to pay respect, but it brings the virus back to their villages. This is their tradition, and no one can stop it. He doesn't want anyone to die because of him, so he asks Carter to euthanize him. Carter is in great pain, as this is the most difficult decision he has ever made. Meanwhile, Rhodes tearfully says goodbye to the pregnant woman and her son. At this moment, he and Melinda discover that the medicine in their bag is missing. Suddenly, the chief's room is engulfed in a raging fire. Rhodes realizes that Carter killed the chief and set the fire. Furious, he vows to report the matter and make Carter pay the price. Misunderstood, Carter offers no further explanation. Back to the present, 4 workers of the monkey house tested positive for the Ebola virus, while the other 172 individuals tested negative. The members of Congress believed that since these people did not show any severe symptoms, it might not be Ebola. Nancy and Carter argued about this situation. She believed that the battle was far from over, as Ebola was constantly evolving and strengthening. As the Congress members wanted to end the meeting, Peter spoke up, saying that they had not escaped unscathed and had been affected. Rhodes asked the members to stay and listen to Nancy's speech, so they sat back down for the speech. She said that this strain of the virus from the monkey house was very similar to Zaire Ebola, and a tiny change in the genetic code might have saved them. However, they couldn't always be so lucky. The virus could be transmitted to patients and their families by medical staff, spreading when people cherished and showed kindness to each other, as well as when humanity was most vulnerable. So now they couldn't wait for an outbreak to begin their response. After the meeting, Carter decided to return to Africa to track down Ebola. The monkeys this time were from the Philippines, but the source of Ebola must be in Africa. The two embraced before parting. Upon returning to the lab, Peter had drawn up plans for an upgraded version of the lab. Although it would take a lot of time to raise funds and construct, he knew they needed to be prepared in advance. Rhodes kissed his wife Melinda, who came to pick him up. The United States had never lowered the rating for the Reston Ebola virus, and to this day, it remains a level 4 high-risk virus. The emergence of these viruses seemed to be the result of human encroachment on the natural environment. Perhaps Earth's immune system had realized that humans were the most destructive pathogens, and these viruses would return stronger than ever. Carter returned to Africa once more, heading to the islands where various viruses mingled, known as Plague Island. As humans cut down the homes of these viruses and killed their hosts, the viruses needed new hosts, humans. The virus had been alive for billions of years, and the Ebola virus was constantly mutating, waiting for its next chance to strike. There had been 28 Ebola outbreaks in 1976. Nancy and her husband retired together after 30 years of service and returned to the University of Kansas, where they continued to play an essential role in the fight against Ebola. In fact, this virus incident laid the groundwork for new outbreak protocols. In 2014, Ebola broke out in countries like Guinea, resulting in over 10,000 deaths. In 2018, a new Ebola outbreak emerged in Congo, and by far there is still no cure for Ebola. This is Daniel CC Movie Channel. Stay safe and enjoy your day.